Howdy, friends. So in this video, what we're going to do is talk about extended emotions and the social world, right? So the other thing with which we can dynamically interact. So in the previous video, well, previous in the way that I'm recording them, we talked about extended emotions and in material culture, right? So the physical world around us. So now we're going to talk about the social world. Now, when we get into the social world, we have a whole lot of things that we can account for, but we're going to break things up into a couple of categories, right? So one is we can talk about interpersonal relationships and extended emotions. And then we're going to talk about groups and extended emotions. So with interpersonal relationships, the idea is that there's a kind of mutual affecting of one another so that our emotional states like sort of go back and forth between the two of us, right? So the paradigm case that Kruger and Szanto give is that of a parent and an infant, right? So that infants sort of mimic the emotional state of the parent, and the parent is affected by that, right? So that's one way in which emotions can extend. Now, another way which you might think of emotions extending might be with, you and some really close friends. So your emotional state affects your friend's emotional state, and your friend's emotional state affects your emotional state, right? In this kind of coupled and integrated way. And together, you experience emotions that you weren't capable of experiencing alone, right? Or you have emotion, or you find yourself in emotional states that you couldn't get to if you were on your own. So, for example, it might be that you and your friend are both ecstatic about something, right? And so your joy, your sort of ecstatic mood affects your friend. Your friend is joyful and ecstatic, and so you are too. And so it takes you to a kind of joyfulness that you could not have experienced on your own. Related to this might be experiences of humor, right? I don't know if humor doesn't strike me as an emotion, but it's really kind of in the ballpark here. And I think this example will help illustrate what Kruger and Szanto are getting at, which is that we find things funnier when we experience it with another person, right? You watch a sitcom on your own, it's funny, maybe you chuckle out loud. But if you watch it with another person, you are substantially more likely to laugh out loud, right? You're likely to find it funnier. And so in this case, you have a kind of dynamic relationship, a kind of coupled relationship, in which you find something funnier than you would have had your friend not been there. So that's the interpersonal version, or the interpersonal case of extended emotions, right? You have another individual with whom your dynamic interaction elevates your emotions, or perhaps dampens your emotions, right? Now, the next one is with groups, right? And sort of our sort of groups small version, right? Like a cluster of folks that you often see, or much larger, like your broader sociocultural group. Now, the big question here is, can groups have emotions? And philosophers and psychologists and sociologists, for that matter, are all sort of the jury's out for everybody on whether or not groups can have emotions, or they can be in emotional states. We can talk about something like mass hysteria, right? Or there are cases where like fits of laughing will affect entire communities in a really strange and bizarre way. But it's not clear if these phenomena are like groups experiencing emotions as a group, not individuals all having the same emotion, but whether the group itself as its own thing experiences emotions, right? Or whether a culture can experience emotions, right? It's not totally clear that that is or isn't the case, right? So I would leave it to you all to sort of think through this further. Finally, at least with respect to socio-cultural norms and practices, we can think about emotions extending at events involving other people at a particular moment in time, and also across time, right? So this one, it requires a little bit more sort of conceptual, imaginative footwork, but um, I think it's still, but I think it's still pretty darn cool. So, for example, think about rituals that you have at particular events, right? Um, so when you graduate from college, right, there might be a particular ritual that you engage in with your family and friends, or if you go to church on Sunday, or you go to a synagogue on a Saturday, or you go to a mosque on a Friday, right? There are rituals that happen there. Uh, Birthday parties, right? There are often rituals that happen there. All of these things are cases of rituals happening at a time, at a moment in time, that affect us emotionally, right? Now, these rituals didn't just sort of fall out of the sky, they're the product of human interactions, right? Human interactions have built up this sort of stockpile of rituals, and we deploy those rituals at a time. But part of why we have those rituals as opposed to other ones is because they affect us emotionally, right? They bring out certain kinds of emotions in us. And in turn, we we can participate in those rituals in various ways and thereby help bring out other emotions in ourselves. So, for example, I remember once when I was a young man in high school, I went to Boys State, and one of the closing days at Boys State, which for anybody who doesn't know, Boys State is this thing where like you get two representatives from each high school in the state, and then you go and then you learn all about like state government, and it's like super patriotic. At the one of the closing events, they gathered all of us, right, all these boys, all these like 16, 17-year-old boys into like a gym, and then they shut off all the lights, and then they had a single American flag waving, right, with a light focused on it. Now, this ritual, which had been practiced at Boys State for years, decades, right, it has a kind of dynamic interaction, right? It it attempts to create in us a kind of a feeling of patriotism, right? So it's trying to help bring out of us a feeling of patriotism. But whether or not it's capable of doing that depends on the people there, right? It depends on the individuals participating in this ritual. So some folks can go all in, and right, and so it's like this is drawing out feelings of patriotism, but the individual wants to have those feelings drawn out, right? So they have this kind of amplified patriotism. Other folks might be more reluctant, right? And as the ritual is attempting to bring out the patriotic feelings, the individuals might sort of repress those feelings. But this is a case in which you have a ritual that's built up over time with the intention or the purpose of bringing out certain feelings, and then the individual sort of modulates feelings as they're interacting within this ritual, right? So that's called a synchronic event, right? It happens at a moment. Now, the other one is going to be a sort of talking about diachronic norms, right? And so diachronic means across time. So we think, for example, about certain social taboos around eating. So, for example, if you were to eat your pet or to even propose eating your pet, people would look at you in a horror, right? They would be horrified at the suggestion, right? Also, if you were to think about, um, dating a sibling, right? Or your first cousin. Oh, first cousin, kind of a weird case. Darwin married his first cousin, right? But there are some kinds of relationships that are taboo, right? And so these are norms that have developed over time. And part of why they've developed over time is because we have emotional reactions to these norms, right? So the norms affect us, but nonetheless, we participate in the acting out of these norms, right? And so we sort of like, and so we invest ourselves emotionally in these norms as well, right? So the norms affect us, and then we support the norm, right? So again, you have this back and forth, this dynamic relationship, right? But in this case, we're talking about a dynamic relationship with norms that persist over time.